And we are live. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, my wonderful people. Thank you for joining us again for this very special helping of Audacity for Breakfast. Conversations for people bold enough to build change. I am Dr. Senenge, one of the conveners of this table, alongside, as always, the force who is the money mechanic, Christine Esquire. Please say something to the people.
Hi everyone, Sisunechi. Welcome to tonight's live session with us on Audacity for breakfast. We know that we've been away for about 2 weeks now, but we are back. The break was needed, necessary, and we're looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you for being here.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And yes, we are back. We're back from this brief hiatus. Sometimes in life, you need to pause and
Mm,
experience life and
mm,
live as life goes through phases.
mm,
So again, my people, Mr. Unichi, Sisu Unichi, we thank you for being here for this very special episode. I
mm,
grew up in the US, and there was a time when our popular shows would have a very special episode. It was a time where we would talk about serious matters or those matters in life that aren't always the high points, and they are important points. So in
mm,
this episode, we like to bring us here to talk a little bit, spend a little bit of time talking about the universal truth, one of those universal truths that we all experience. No matter
mm,
who you are, no matter what you do, every
mm,
single being that experiences the beginning of life will also at one point or another experience the end of life.
mm,
Each of us will die. And
mm,
before that, we will experience loss. We'll
mm,
likely experience loss several times. And
mm.
those losses will all impact us differently. And they will
Yes.
change us and change us differently,
Mm,
I think.
mm,
So we've been on hiatus the past 2 weeks, and we've been experiencing some loss and processing some
mm,
loss and
mm.
beginning the navigation through loss. And we are happy to be here today to share a little bit of that with you. Um, I think it's interesting to be here today at this particular moment, right, where people all over the world are experiencing the loss of Dolly Parton, in
Yeah.
different regards, a phenomenal human being and humanitarian who left such an impact on the world,
Mhm.
right? At the same time, there are so many people who are experiencing losses much closer to them. There are those who are experiencing loss through natural devastations, causing losses all over the world in many places. There are military and political unrests, which are causing
Mm,
losses all over the world. In every moment of every day of life all over the world, life itself is causing loss.
mm,
I think that's one of the things that it's important to remind ourselves of, that loss is a necessary
yeah.
part of life, and that life,
Mm,
just living life, we will experience loss and life will cause loss. It's a part of it. There's no escaping
mm,
that.
mm,
2 weeks ago, I was in one of my senior leadership groups,
yeah.
and one of my colleagues, a guy who had just turned 50, he was sharing
Mhm.
that he had not yet lost anyone close to him.
Hmm.
Yeah. And that was an experience that he had not yet had at almost 50 years old.
Mm,
And I thought that was really interesting. And
mm,
as we were talking about it, he asked me if I have lost anybody close to me. And I kind of, as I get lost in my thoughts, I kind of smiled a little bit and I said, yes, I have. And he got this look on his face. He said, boy, why did you smile when you said that? And I said, I'll be
mm.
very honest with you. Every time I think about this person or some of these people, it makes me smile every
Yeah.
single time. I mean, for me, when I think about those people I've lost, the real ones, right? It
Mhm.
always makes me smile. I remember their spirit. I remember the things they did for me. I remember the
Mhm.
things we did together. I
Mhm.
remember the things we said we would do.
Mm.
Uh, and when I sit here and when I start to maybe feel a certain kind of way, I remember and I hear them say, Senenge, you never finish now. That makes me smile. Like the
Yeah.
real ones, when you remember them, for me, that those people, they change you. right? And
Yeah.
that's worth it. So as
Mm,
we experience loss, right, and we process loss and we navigate our way through loss and through losses of the real ones, it's my invitation for those of us who live and continue to live to
yeah.
live for those shared dreams, right? And
Mm,
we each win as we get each one of them, give a toast or a cheers or a high
mm,
five, an
mhm.
acknowledgement to those partners, right? Who maybe we've lost, but they're still rocking with us.
That's
And
right.
let's acknowledge them, right? And talk about them and tell their stories, the real ones. They change you. And talk about how they changed you.
Mm, yes. Hmm.
So I'm hopeful that
So
in this
you
time, yes, please.
no, go ahead, finish up. You're just
Now, I was just going
touching
to
a
say,
lot
I
of
was hoping
points.
that in this time, as we share a little bit and we talk about loss and maybe even just experience some of processing that, like, yeah, let's do it, right? Like, just tell the stories. Let's share how we've been changed by loss, how we hope to
Mm,
change through loss, because it's not
mm,
just the present loss that we've experienced. This is just the present, it's the current loss of
mhm.
many losses that we have experienced and we
Yeah.
will continue to experience.
Mm,
Sorry, I
mm.
interrupted you.
No, that's fine. Speaking of loss, I think that today's episode is a very personal one for me, because I'm currently dealing with a loss, of someone really special to me, and you know, I have lost loved ones before, and I've been asking myself recently, like, why does this particular loss hurt so much? I've had to lose close people. I think that the first major loss I would say I had in my life was when I lost my grandfather. Um, I was pretty little then. So maybe I didn't mourn per se, but I understood that he was gone and he wasn't coming back. But then I would say that the first other major loss that I understood really well was when I lost my father 14 years ago. And I remember that vividly because I was in the middle of my, my exams, the exams that we call WAEC in Nigeria, the one that you write when you're done with secondary school. And I remember that when it happened, it hit home because it wasn't a sudden death per se. And when I mean it wasn't a sudden death, what I mean is that he had been ill for a bit before that time. And so I had gotten a chance to care for him before the death came. Fast forward to after that, I lost um my mom's best friend that I grew up knowing, like as like a second mom and auntie. Then I lost two of my mom's sisters, you know, in close proximity. And I think that those are the very major losses that I have experienced. Um, but then prior to my most recent loss, I started to attend an event called Grief Unfiltered.
Mm,
And in that gathering, I came to understand that we don't just grieve the loss of people alone. We also grieve the loss of things. We grieve the loss of opportunities. We grieve the loss of just many things, right? And that has given me a different idea of grief and loss. That you could lose an opportunity and you are allowed to grieve, right? Another thing also that helped me understand is that grief does not have a manual. So there's no
mm,
manual for grieving. So you can't tell someone how they should grieve. You need to allow people grieve the way they should grieve. Um, very recently I lost my partner, and that was very devastating for me, being that I had been with this person for quite a a lump sum of time, and we had built a lot of things together. We were still building a lot of things together. There were prospects for the future, there were plans for the future, there were conversations that were had, there were memories that were made. And because it was something sudden, there was nothing that pointed to a death on the horizon. It was pretty shocking for me and everyone who loved him, right? And over the past 2+ weeks, I've been dealing with that loss. But there is a life after loss, and I think that's where our conversation is steering towards today. How do you pick yourself back up after loss? Is grief the end? I don't think grief is the end, but I think that at the beginning stages of grief, you feel like the whole world is ending, um,
Mm,
because you can't really understand why that happened. You can't really see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's just you and your feelings and your memories, and you not being able to explain how you're feeling. I know that recently people have asked me, "How are you?" And really, I just say, "I don't know." I'm not happy, I'm not sad, I'm just there. I am still processing. um and I think that one thing again grief does to you is that it also teaches you how to be a better support to other people that are grieving. Yes. I think that most people that have not experienced grief of any kind um are not able to really grieve with you, because they think they have the right words but they don't. In grief, I can promise you that you do not have the words when you are grieving. You don't have the words. You can't explain how you're feeling. Um, your head is full. You're alone with your thoughts. You're alone with your memories, and you can't really say how you're feeling. Um, you just sometimes want to be alone. I know that for someone who is such an open person, a people person, a very energetic person, one thing that grief did to me in the recent times is very low energy, no motivation to do so much. Talking was so difficult. I think that today is probably the longest conversation I've had in a while. Um, and I think that that was just me also trying to come to terms with the reality of everything. They
mm,
talk about the stages of grief. They say it starts with denial, then there's a little bit of anger, then there's the sadness and everything. I feel like I go through the motions every once in a while. Some
mm,
days I'm angry, some days I'm in denial, some days I'm sad, some days I'm just all up in my feelings, right? So, you started with something, and I'll just reiterate that, and then I'll pause for a bit. You started by saying that death is something that we must all face at some point. Um, and I think that when you go through a loss, it gives you the painful reminder that one day we're all going to die, right? And it just reminds you of the fragility of life, and how we're not going to be here forever as much as we think. And if we
mm,
started losing loved ones, we too will be the loved one that others will also lose at some point. And so I think that for me, it just reminds me that I need to keep living audaciously, and I need to keep, making my life count for, eternity, because I want people to be able to say good things about me when I'm not here.
mm.
So I think I'll pause here, and then I'll hand, this over back to Senenge.
Y- Thank you very much, and thank you very much for that share. There are a number of things that you said there that I think really hit on a number of key points. You know, there can be a suddenness and an unexpectedness in certain loss, right? That can be, I think, quite devastating in many ways. Before we get there, though, you talked about, yeah, and I appreciate how much you talked about loss as you've experienced it in different ways, starting with the loss of a grandfather, right, and then your
Mhm.
father, and so on. A thing that I think can be fascinating about loss when we think about it, as we grow up in life, there's certain losses that we even grow expecting, even if we don't know we're expecting them.
mm,
And as I reflected on some of what you were saying, some of those are familial losses, right? Like we can kind of, growing up, we're expecting that at some point we're going to lose a grandparent. They will not be around anymore. We might even
yeah.
expect that we're going to lose a parent. They will not be around anymore at some point.
Mm,
Some of those
mhm,
things. So even if they're sudden, we expect it's going to happen, and it can impact us differently. And I think that that's fascinating. As you were
mm,
talking then, though, too, you talked about relationships and partnerships
mm,
and the loss that we experience when those end or when we lose those relationships or those partnerships in a death, and the suddenness or the unexpectedness of that. And I
mm,
do think that there's something really significant about that, or something that we should not kind of just gloss over. That, like,
mm,
yes, when we do enter into partnerships or into relationships, I don't know if we ever think about the end of them,
mm,
right? Like, oh,
mm,
we're going to be in this and continue dot 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 forever, wherever. Even when we take a step back and think about, okay, those grandparents that we were thinking about, that we expected they would pass, they, I imagine, as they blossomed and in their relationships together as a couple or as a group of friends or whatever, didn't have in their minds the end of those relationships.
mm,
So the thing about loss and processing loss, it is interesting as we peel away the different layers of relationships, the different ways that we are
mm,
engaged in those relationships, and then the different expectations that we have of the lives of those relationships and the curves that life will
mm,
throw relationships.
mm, mm.
Talked about
I
grief. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna, just casually say that I think that one of the things I have been, trying to pen my thoughts down very recently, and I think that I will definitely admit that I never ever really imagined loss in this capacity. I think that when we enter into certain relationships, we just assume it's this person is always going to be there. And
Mhm.
so when a loss like this happens, it's tough to imagine your life without this person. Like you said, there are some already expected losses, like elderly people, your grandparents, even your parents. But when it comes to a partner, you're just like, but we've literally not even touched the tip of the future, right? So how is this loss just coming from nowhere? So yes, I was going to just say, and I was also going to say that also we grieve people differently based on our relationship with them.
Yes.
So in this loss, I was grieving as a partner, as a lover, as a close, very extra close friend. His family was grieving, the loss of his son. His sister was grieving the loss of her only brother. The
Mhm.
mother was grieving the loss of her only son. Now that hits totally different. That is totally different from someone who is grieving this person as someone I went to school with. We are all going to grieve on different levels in different ways.
I think that's very, very insightful and very impactful. Um, I, this reminds me of a story of an experience. So when I don't remember how old I was, but this is in my 20s at some point, my best friend's father died. Now, this was a man who I had known for probably 20 years at this point. So somebody who
Mm,
was quite close to me from when I was young. And the
mm,
moment he died, I was down the street I was in the office, which was just a mile away from the hospital. I left the office, I went to the hospital and met my friend's family there. Immediately we left, we went to the funeral home. I was with the family from the moment until, until we had the burial.
mhm,
And after the burial, we were back at the house, and I'll tell this audience, I drank too much. But
mm,
I was a machine in helping everybody just do the things that we needed to do to move from the hospital to the burial. But then as soon as the burial was done, I completely fell apart. And this
yeah.
thing that you talk about grief, like I was good until all of a sudden I wasn't. right?
Yeah.
And then
Mhm.
grief grew to me a particular kind of way, and it
Mm.
manifested the way that it would. And
Mhm.
and people have stories from that time because they will talk about, boy, Senenge was there and he was so tight until all of a sudden he really wasn't, and we all had to take care of him because it was a mess, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Grief is fascinating, and I appreciate. I want to point back to something that you said before in going through the stages of grief. I like and I appreciate those frameworks, right? We talk about the seven stages of grief and so on and so
Mm.
forth. Something that I think that we lose sight of sometimes, or we don't bring up enough, is that this is not a linear thing.
No. Oh my
Grief is
God.
not linear,
No.
right?
Mm-mm.
And so, yes, they're not going to start one place and then magically or majestically even end at another place. I'm sorry to
Mm-mm.
tell folks out there, or I'm happy to remind folks out there that grief doesn't end.
Hmm.
Grief
Hmm.
doesn't end. I would challenge anybody to say that it ends. I'd invite us to consider that it may take different forms. It evolves, it becomes something else. We may
Hmm.
even get to a point from severe pain to the celebration of that person who's no longer here. And I would
Yeah.
invite that it's all grief. It's all part of the
So.
grieving process.
Hmm.
I don't know that grief ends. And I think if we're looking for an end to grief, we're going to be challenged for that.
Hmm.
If we can embrace that some of this is part of life, as it is part of life, that can help us navigate the grief.
Hmm.
As we started off this conversation, I think before we got on air, something you said that somebody shared with you, that you don't move on, you move forward,
You move forward. Yes.
right? So this thing about grief, I don't know that you move on from grief. I
Hmm.
have been moving forward with my grief
Hmm.
from each loss that I have experienced.
Hmm. 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 So we have some pretty interesting comments. Peace has been
Yeah.
following the conversation. Hi, Peace. So the first comment she mentioned was coming to terms with the fact that there is a life after loss is very difficult but
Mm,
necessary. And then she followed up by saying, no two losses are the same, even if they're all immediate family members. I totally
absolutely.
agree with this.
Yes.
There is no template, time frame, nor pattern for grieving. I think that, yeah, and she added and said, you have to learn to live with it. I think that these are all valid points, right? And
Hmm.
I think that one mistake that and I just know it's because people are ignorant about how to support people with grief. Remember, I
Mm,
mentioned that I started to, prior to even my recent loss, I had been attending, a gathering called Grief Unfiltered, and that taught me a lot how to be a supportive person to someone that is grieving. And
mhm,
many times we don't understand that we actually need to get the right knowledge and help so that we can help others grieve properly. Um, and without that, you see people trying to give you a template for grieving. So I'll give a practical example. I was watching a movie earlier today about two people who met in the workplace, and unbeknownst to them, their partners, so the lady's husband died in an accident and the man's wife died in an accident. Now, coincidentally, they find out later that the car the lady's husband was driving that lost control of their brakes was the same car that crashed into the
mhm.
man's pregnant wife and killed her.
Wow.
Now, this is what happened. These two people meet in the workplace and they get familiar and then they start to, catch feelings in Nigerian parlance. And, because they're human, they start to get close to each other. But something caught my attention that one of the days when he went out with her, he comes back home and his wife's sister, his late wife's sister, had seen him and the other lady. So she comes to
Mm,
report to the woman. And the woman says, it's not been up to a year since your wife died, and you're already forgetting her and moving on to another woman. And so do you love the other woman? And you could feel the pain in the guy's, eyes. And he said, nobody so she said, so are you trying to replace her? And he
mhm,
made a statement and he said, No one can ever replace her. Nobody can ever replace. I said, I'm human, right? And I think that in that moment, that woman was guilty of trying to tell this man how he should grieve.
Uh-huh.
So people think that because you are grieving, you shouldn't smile, you
Hmm.
shouldn't go out, you shouldn't go clubbing, you shouldn't be seen at public events, you shouldn't be talking so much. You shouldn't be posting a beautiful and happy life because you are grieving. And
Mhm.
that is not how it works for everybody. Some people actually best deal with their grief when they get back to work and they are up and doing. Now, I have
Mhm.
heard, people tell me over the past couple of days that I've tried to ease back into work, to take a break and dump everything and not do anything and just sit with my feelings. And I understand and I love them and I appreciate them. But I also ask myself, what would my late partner want me to do now? And I know he'd want me to pick myself back up and keep moving, right? I
Uh-huh.
also think that sitting and just sulking and drowning in my grief will not help my mental health in any way. Now, the fact that I am trying to ease back into work does not mean I don't grieve. No, no, no. In my quiet moments, I grieve, right? But we have to keep moving forward, right? So I think that it is wisdom to allow people grieve and go through the process. Of course, there are now times when you can get concerned. For example, the grief therapist I know would say, give them time. It's when it's getting to something like 2 years, it's getting over a year, and you see this person is emaciating, they're getting deeper into depression, they're doing harmful things. That is when you can now begin to say you want to bring in an intervention. But the truth is, for the first couple of months to 1 year, you're still grieving. The wound is
Mhm.
still fresh. You're still alone with your memories. And we must be careful not to try and give people a manual on how to grieve. This is so critical and so important. I think that when we understand that, we also understand not to also pressure people who are grieving when they cannot really articulate what's going on, right? Um, Sometimes silence is bliss when people are grieving. Um, and I know that you want to be able to say all of the wonderful things and all of the things you want to say. But at that time, maybe just being silent and you just be letting them know you are there for them, it will mean more to them than any words you'd want to tell them while they are grieving.
Yes. Amen and amen. There's so many things that you said, one of there's I don't want to say it's a fault of the human condition, but there's a thing that, is definitively human that we can't help ourselves. We project. And so,
Mm,
I feel a certain way. I expect that you must feel this way also. Or
mm,
I'm going to go through something a certain way. I expect that, well, you must or you should do this
mm,
way. My therapist says, don't shit on anybody and don't let
mm,
anybody shit on you, right?
mm.
Because we live in a world where you should do these things. Well, who
Yeah,
should what, right? No.
finds
So
that.
don't shit on anybody and don't let anybody shit on you. I think that's interesting. I think that's funny. But then also, the thing about we talked about grief and other people's grieving processes. So I think it's important to be mindful to not project, right, our own process on someone else. I also think that there we need to find ways to afford a lot of latitude to not judge somebody else's grieving process and to allow for
Yeah.
it.
Mm-hmm.
We regularly remind ourselves in life or whatever that, oh, well, we don't know the details of those people's relationships. We
Mm,
also don't know the details of those people or of that individual. We don't know how they
yeah.
do what they do, right? So I'm out in the street and I'm out in life and I do a lot of things. Well, my family also knows that I spend a lot of time in the gym. I spend a lot of time in the gym because that's where I work through a lot of things. That's where I
Yeah.
grieve. That's where I feel a lot of pain. That's where I feel a lot of anger. That's where I do a lot of things that a lot of other people do out in the world in public, you know. But that's my process, and I don't project my process on anyone else.
Yeah.
I'm the only one in my house who gyms the way I do, but that's
Yeah.
because that's my
Mm-hmm.
process, you know. So to bring
Mm-hmm.
it back to this context, I think that it is really important to, one, yeah, own and realize our own processes, but then also not project them and to honor the processes of other people. And it's really hard. It's really hard because we get ourselves wrapped up in the shoulding. So, well, you know, it should be this way or it should look this way. And as hard as it is
Yeah.
to not project or to not think that we know all, I think it's important that we not
Mm.
project, to remind ourselves that we don't
Yeah.
know. And however else somebody
Mm-hmm.
else is grieving is their process they must own and they must hold on to.
Hmm. Hmm. This is a very therapeutic conversation for me. Especially in this season. And I would just say really that another thing also, as you process grief, is you're allowed to you're allowed to forgive yourself when you're grieving.
Mhm.
Um, because I think that one thing also that we deal with when we're grieving is a lot of regret, you know. And I've had to forgive myself multiple times over the past couple of weeks. Forgive myself for things I did, things I didn't do, things I wished I did, things I wished I said, things I indulged more. During grief, you start to think about all of the silly arguments you guys had, and you're like, if I knew this person was going to die, I wouldn't even have, made that such a big deal. I wouldn't have made such a fuss, and I've been so quick to let it go. You wish you had been more committed, just you begin to wish a lot of things. And it's good to think about those things, but it's also important that you don't drown in that regret. You don't
Mhm.
drown in that regret. It's important that you forgive yourself. Um, and also forgive that person if they did something to you and probably you never got a chance to settle it before their demise. Forgiveness is important. I remember coming back on one of the days, and I just I just outburst, and I asked my therapist, and I said, can you forgive a dead person?
Hmm.
And I said, can you forgive a dead person? Because I'm just like, okay, I need to forgive some things, but right now, in my reality, I want this person to wake up and give me answers, but I know they cannot wake up and give me answers. So I'm like, okay, so how am I supposed to because the idea of forgiveness we
Hmm.
have is that this person is there to take accountability in some way, so we can say you did this to me, or I was hurt by this, and then the person says sorry, and then you say, okay, I forgive you, right? So now how do you do that when the person is not here? um And my therapist asked me something, and he said, when you forgive someone, who benefits the most?
Uh-huh.
And that kind of like shut me up for a bit.
Yeah.
Who benefits the most? Um, when you forgive for it's actually for yourself. You are the greatest beneficiary of forgiveness. And so you don't forgive for anybody else but yourself. And so it's important that you learn to forgive yourself, you learn to forgive the person and whatever they've done to you, um or they didn't do. I think that is something that is critical, because many times people are grieving, but what they are really doing is also carrying grievance.
Yes.
But they can't identify that what I'm actually carrying is grievance and not grief.
Hmm.
Yes, I am grieving this person, but I'm actually aggrieved against them.
Yeah.
And if you're not
Yeah.
careful, your grieving may even be prolonged because you are carrying grievance, but you haven't identified that it is because I am struggling to forgive this person that my grieving process is actually prolonging. So I'm also learning that it's important that we forgive ourselves. And sometimes when I feel like that, I actually verbalize and say, I forgive myself. I forgive myself. Whatever it is I wish I could have done, or I wish I didn't do, or I wish I did, I forgive myself so that I'm not carrying the burden of unforgiveness in my heart, even as I grieve. So I can grieve this person truly from my heart as someone I loved and not someone I'm holding grievances against. Okay, so let's read a few thoughts. Okay, so extraordinary lady is sending me some virtual hugs. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, so Peace says, um, one of the things I have tried, I'm trying to show this on our screen, but it seems not to be showing. But it says,
Here we
one
go.
of the things I have tried as much as possible not to do is project my grieving process on others because I've experienced it and there's a very thin line one can cross if
Yes.
not being intentional. This is so true. The issue of projecting your grief upon others. Yes, projecting your grief upon others. So people have not offended you but because of how you're feeling, you can sometimes become passive aggressive because you are grieving. And I think that that's something that is very critical, right? So grief awareness is such a thing,
Mm. Yeah.
and then he says the part of forgiving yourself, the deceased, and God is something we don't really talk about, but we
Mm.
should. That is so key. Forgiveness is so, I don't know, I think that for me that's one of the greatest lessons I am taking, out of this. There is a need to forgive yourself, while you are grieving as well.
There's a thing that you said that I really hope that the people latch on to, and as you say, forgiveness. In the lead up to that, you talked about sometimes you have to say it out loud, and I'm really glad you said that. I was writing down notes that, like, yeah, make sure we bring up that point. Folks, it's really important to, like, some of these things, to not keep them inside too much. I spent so much time here, so much time living with this guy, and I really like this guy. I really like this guy. But if all I do is spend time living with this guy and talking with this guy and just keep letting those things bounce around in here and not letting them come out, that will drive you crazy. That will drive this guy crazy. And
Mm,
so, people, as
mm,
you're experiencing things, it is important to let them out. You talked about externalizing, I forgive myself, I forgive the other person. Even if the person is no longer here, a point that I was going to make is I've written letters or left voicemails to people I've lost, even after they've gone, because I needed to let it out. I needed to not keep it inside. And those actions, doing those things, are important. Christine, I feel like I froze. Maybe I lost you. I don't know if I'm talking to myself right now. There we go. You came back. Said, I don't know if I lost you, if I
yes,
was talking to myself right there. Okay.
I lost you as
So,
well. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I was just talking about the importance of letting it out, right? Not keeping
Mm,
it in. Like, it's really important to let it out. You said something, you externalize it, you vocalize, I forgive. And letting that out, I say, is really important. I've done that with people I've lost, where whether it's just that the action of vocalizing it, but even there are times where I've written letters to people I've lost, or I think I lost you again, froze again. Oh,
mm.
oh, there we
I
go.
got the last part.
Or I've called and left
Yeah.
voicemails, even after they're gone, because I needed to let
Mm,
go and not hold on. It's part of the process. It has helped the healing process. And so again, all of these
mm,
things, you know, It doesn't need to make sense to anybody else. It doesn't need to be about anybody else because it is not about anybody else. It's about, you
Hmm.
or the
I
individual in their process as they're experiencing it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So I when I couldn't vocalize how I was feeling, for the first chunk of the 2 weeks. But then recently, I think like 4 days ago, I decided to start like a grief journal. And
Mm,
I thought that just taking some time to write every day about how I was feeling would help. And I would say it has helped. I've started to at least talk about some of the things on my mind. It could be random stuff. Um, and I feel like it's something I probably would one day want to just go to the graveside and just read out loud. I feel like, you know, when I was taking a break from work, my boss told me um that I need to vocalize a lot of things to also deal with the denial aspect of it. Because when I was talking to him, he asked me if I had cried, and I said, "Oh, I hadn't cried like for the latter part of it." And he said it was important that even if I can't cry, I need to vocalize the fact that this person is gone. Because
mhm,
sometimes we're living in denial. I remember the first couple of days I was in serious denial. So I kept dialing his number. I was reciting his number out loud. I was sending him reels on Instagram and then going back to check if he had seen them.
mm,
And then I would still keep sending reels, and all of that. And that was just part of the whole denial thing. Like, okay, this person is probably, going to open my reel a couple of days later and respond to me and all of that. And one thing he told me is that even as you vocalize, things like I forgive myself, I forgive this person, you also need to vocalize things like this person is gone, this person is dead, this person is not coming back. So that you deal with the denial aspect of it and you're able to start making peace with your current reality. Um, so things like writing letters, things like writing your thoughts down, things like sending the voicemails, even things like sending emails. These things are a way of releasing, even the person to go, because sometimes we're holding this person so much and they're occupying space that we're not even allowing other people into our lives as well.
mhm.
So these are all pretty important processes of grieving that me personally I'm experiencing um as I go through the process as well. Yeah.
As we get deep into the conversation and touch on so many things, um, there's, there are two things I want to make sure that we touch on a little bit before we move on. One, I think, as we grieve and as we process, at some point, I think it's important to be reflective, right? And to think about those people and to think about those relationships and to think about how we are changed because of that,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that for me, I know I experience quite a bit when I think about the real ones. When I think about those people who have changed me, who are no longer here. I think about the way they've changed me or how I am
Yeah.
changed because of them.
Yeah.
And again, to reference our earlier conversation, it makes me smile, right? I recognize how I'm better because of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm better
Mm-hmm.
because of our relationship. I'm better because of that experience, because I shared part of my life with that person, because I got to share part of their life with
I
them.
hope the network hasn't cut out for you.
Oh, I hear you now. There we go. I hear you now. We're back.
Okay. All right. I can hear you as well.
Yeah, no, so I was just talking about how I make sure I note how much I'm changed because of that person and having shared some part of our lives together. And then I think it's important to talk about those people, you know, to talk about those
Mm,
people. There's a thing that I started, maybe at some point we'll talk about this, but once upon a time, my youngest daughter was sick. And as she was sick and they were going through the treatment, I was experiencing this outpouring of good in the world. And it was this reminder that there's a lot of good stuff out there. So I
mm.
started to share some good, and people will see when I post things on social, I always hashtag it, share some good.
Yes, I'm good.
Because
Yeah.
I believe in, in putting that stuff out there. And that's where too, when I think about these people, the real ones, those people who changed me, man, I share their stories because that's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's the good stuff that I'm remembering. It's the good stuff that makes me smile. And I don't want to keep that a secret. I want people
Mm.
to know about, yeah, I had this great experience through this great relationship that I had. This is how it
Yeah.
impacted me. And it was because of
Mm-hmm.
this person who's no longer here and who deserves to
Mm-hmm.
be celebrated.
Hmm. Amazing. You just reminded me of something. I don't think that book is anywhere close by, but um, the my grief counselor wrote a book, and she titled it "We Say Their Name." And
Mm,
she said she wrote that book because when she lost her husband a couple of years ago, her husband's name became very heavy in people's mouths. So I hope I can be heard. Okay, Senenge,
oh
can you
yeah.
hear me? Because I lost
Oh
you
yeah.
for a bit.
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Mm.
I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. So she wrote a book called We Stay the Same. And the reason she wrote that book was because when her husband died, the people around him all of a sudden couldn't say his name,
Hmm.
right? They were referring to him as the deceased. And, they were calling him every other thing except his name. And to her, the fact that they couldn't say his name spoke volumes to her because she said his name was Yakubu. Yakubu was an actual person. He lived and walked on this earth. We made memories. He had lives he touched. And because now he's gone, nobody can say his name, you know. And, I remember she said she wrote another book. I've forgotten the name of the book, but then it was just trying to talk about how we light candles, to remember people. And the idea was basically the fact that when people die, we often forget their special days. So all
Mm,
of a sudden nobody's remembering their birthdays and their special days. And she said with time she realized it was only her that kept remembering his birthday. And I think that too often we move on, even though you don't necessarily move on. But in our process of moving forward, we stop saying their name. We
hmm.
stop talking about the things that they did that impacted the lives of others. So yes, you hear people talk about how when people die, um, they say the nicest things at their funeral, right? But
Right.
have you noticed that really that's usually where it stops?
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody comes a year later to say, "Oh, I remember this person for this and for that." Very rarely does that happen. And I think that we are here as reminders of the impact that these people had in our lives. And we owe it to them. Can you hear me? Because I think we
Yes.
lost each
I can hear
other.
you now. I can hear you now.
Okay. Did you get
And
the
you said
last
we
thing I
owe it
said?
to them. Yeah, go ahead. We owe it to them to.
Yeah, I just said we owe it to them to, remember their names, remember the impact they had in our lives, and carry their legacies with us as we go along.
I agree 100%. That's why, again, I say tell the stories, and
Yeah.
talk about them and talk about how they changed you and how they impacted you. Am I
Yeah.
still live? Christine, I think we're better now.
Yes, yes.
Yes, because there's yeah, when I think about, I had friends in particular who, how have I been changed by the loss of some of those very close relationships, those very personal partners who have really helped me grow in many ways. Frankly, one of the ways it has changed me, and when I talked about sharing some good, it makes me now be sure to, I take every opportunity I can to give flowers. In the States, we talk
Mm,
about giving people their flowers, you know,
mm-hmm,
and that's not about pandering, that's not about ass kissing. That's about
mm-hmm.
genuinely telling people you appreciate that you appreciate
That's
them,
right. Mm-hmm,
you know. And so for me, I very much, that's one thing, that's one way I know I have been impacted by the loss of people meaningful to me, is that
yeah.
now I give people their flowers. If you remember when we first started talking, I'm not blowing smoke when I was talking about the things that I have, observed of you over years or so on. Like,
Mm-hmm,
no, I very much believe in, like, if I'm going to talk to you, let me tell you
mm-hmm.
what I appreciate about you. I'm going to give you your flowers. I might not get
Mm,
another chance to do that.
yeah.
I think that's really important. And those are the
Mm-hmm.
memories, right? Those things create the memories.
No, thank you. So giving people their flowers. So Senenge, I want us to I know we'll be rounding up soon, but I want us to talk about specifics. So how do we move forward? Because we've established that you don't move on from grief, you move forward. So I want us to tell the people, I know that in the course of our conversation, we've dropped, gems, on how we are dealing with our loss and what we're doing. But how can we move forward? How can we make progress?
How can
How
we
can we live audaciously even okay. Senenge, can you hear me?
Okay, now I can hear you better.
Mm.
So you said, how can we move forward?
Yes. Can you hear me now? Because I
Yes,
lost
yeah,
you. And I think you lost me as well.
yes.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Did you hear my question?
Parts of it. You were saying, how can we move forward?
Yeah, how can we move forward? We've agreed that we don't move on from grief, but how
Mhm.
can we actually move forward to live audaciously even after we encounter
Well, I hope the network catches this. I
Okay.
I think it's a process. I think we move forward
Can you hear me
step by
now?
step. Yes. Yes, I can hear you now. I
Okay.
do think it's a process. I do think we move forward step by step, one piece at a time. I
Mm-hmm.
think we move forward with grace, in grace. We have to continue to expect that it's going to be hard, right? And we will make progress and we will experience setbacks and we will make progress.
Mm-hmm.
That is important.
Mm.
We don't forget, we celebrate,
Yeah.
right? And we keep showing up, we keep doing the things. I'll be very honest with you, with all of our friends listening right now. For me, part of this is how we, how we honor those memories, how we move forward, how we live audaciously. I'm doing this right now to honor the memories of folks who I've lost, who are not here anymore. You know, people who I dreamed together that we would bridge spaces between Nigeria and the diaspora. That's part of, for me, why Audacity for Breakfast.
I'm back.
Hey,
Can
we're
you hear
back.
me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So I think we can pick up. I have no idea what went wrong, but yeah, I'm
That's all
back.
right. We're back in the game.
Yes.
I don't know if we captured the answer, but the question was about how do we move forward, right? Bit by bit,
Mhm.
pick it up, bit by bit, show up, keep showing up, right? If you had those dreams, see those dreams through, celebrate
Mm,
those dreams.
mhm,
Do it because you said that you would do it,
mm,
right? And see it get done. Is it going to look different? Yes, it has to look different
mm,
and get it done,
mm,
right? And yes, for me, like again, I was trying to say that like that's part of why for me, Audacity for Breakfast. For me, when I think about some of the people that I've lost, doing Audacity for Breakfast was part of the dream. The idea of we might be able to bridge Nigeria and those of us in the diaspora.
mm,
Since I've lost some of these people, I've continued to work towards that dream. This is part of
mm,
it.
mm,
So I think, yeah, it's important to keep showing up in the small ways that you can help fulfill the dreams, in the small ways that you can help celebrate the memories of those people who had an impact in building you to who you are today. It's
mm,
important that you do that,
mm,
right? That's how we honor them. That's how we honor ourselves.
mm. Hmm. Thank you so much. I think that one thing that I started to think about many years ago, even before my recent loss, was, the idea of having legacy projects in honor of people who really played pivotal roles in my life. I think that for those of us who still remain, alive, we can go the extra mile to, do legacy projects in honor of people who were part of our lives, and carrying on shared dreams to the best of our ability. I think that another way to live audaciously after loss is to, first of all, remind yourself that grief is not the end, Grief is only a part of the process, and we must be willing to take it one day at a time. For me, it's a one day at a time thing. I don't know how I'm going to feel in the next 3 days. I don't know how I'm going to deal with the next 1 week, but I know that I'm dealing with today, and today is just enough. Tomorrow, we're going to figure out it. Today, I might not cry, but tomorrow, I might cry, right? And maybe tomorrow will come and I will cry. But after I cry, I'll pick myself back up. So I think that living audaciously takes, after loss, takes one day at a time. One day at a time. I also think that another way to be able to live audaciously after loss is to be able to seek help if you need it. Um, if you need therapy, if you need a grief counselor, I think that these things help with you being able to deal with everything you are going through. Don't be alone. Don't isolate. You may not be able to talk all of the time, but when you can, make sure you're surrounded by people who love you and people who are supporting your process as well. I would say finally that also part of being able to live audaciously is um, forgiving yourself. I'm going back to forgiveness because I think that unforgiveness hinders a lot of people from going ahead. I think that sometimes we often also don't want to go back and live our best lives because we feel we're letting the deceased person down. So, how can I go and live my best life when this person is no more here? So it's very, very important that you forgive yourself and you just, you know, live. You just live, make it count so that when you are no longer there, people can also remember you for the good that you have done.
You said
All
it. You
right.
must live. You must live.
Yeah.
I think we titled this episode very intentionally. We didn't say exist after loss. You must live after loss. And
Mm-hmm.
that's my final word, people. Live.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to everyone who stayed from the beginning to the end. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Today has been a very solemn conversation, but I think that it is needful for everyone, whether you are experiencing a loss or you haven't experienced one. I can assure you, you're going to experience some in your lifetime. We already established that loss isn't only the loss of a person, it could be a loss of a thing, it could be a loss of an opportunity. Loss comes in different forms, and so does grief. Remember that there's no manual to grieving, so allow yourself go through the process and live audaciously even after loss, because grief isn't the end. Um, Remember that we're live every Thursday at 8 p.m. West African time and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Audacity for breakfast. I forgot to celebrate. You know, I'm always celebrating. That today is our seventh episode, and many people say seven is the number of perfection. I don't know
Look
how
at
that
that.
is, but
Look at
yes,
that.
today is our seventh episode. I'm excited we've been able to make it this far. And this just shows us that consistency pays. We look forward to seeing you next week. Do well to subscribe to our channel if you haven't. Follow us on Instagram at Audacity for Breakfast. And make sure you join us next week for another conversation for people bold enough to build change. Senenge, would you like to say bye bye to the house?
All right, people. Thank you very much for joining us. Sisu Nichi. Till next time. Take care of
All right.
yourself. Take care of each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Yes. Oh my God. Somebody just said something. Peace just said, your ability to live after loss is audacity. I think
Indeed,
that's
it
the
is.
line for amazing. Yes. So live and make sure you live audaciously. Good night, everyone.